Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Detroit Institute of Art's Thursdays at the Museum program. I'm Amanda Harrison Keithley, a Community Engagement Manager at the DIA. Thank you so much for joining us for today's program. It's a brand new offering called Seen in the Moment, Impressionist Paintings of the DIA. During the program, I'd like to encourage you to please ask questions. You can do so by selecting the Q&A icon on the right-hand side of your screen. Questions will be read on screen by Christine Mark, the DIA's Manager of Volunteer Development. This event is being recorded, so you can watch it again later on our YouTube or our Facebook page. Today, we're honored to have our original hosts back, trained docents Howard Rosenberg and Ray Henney. Please give them a warm welcome.
Hi, Amanda. It's good to be back. I'm Howard Rosenberg. It's nice to see everybody today on a nice sunny day, and we're excited about a brand new presentation. Hey, Ray, it's good to see you, man.
Howard, always a pleasure. And we are very excited, Howard and I, to present this new tour. It's called Seen in the Moment, Paintings, Impressionist Paintings of the DIA. So Howard, you know, although the Impressionists were found nearly 150 years ago, Impressionist art, particularly its paintings, remains today beloved and extremely popular. Why? At the time of the founding of the Impressionist movement, the art world was dominated by academic traditional art. Longtime institutions like the Académie des Beaux-Arts in Paris promoted such art, which focused on classical or historical subject matter, precise composition and structure, and realism. It was the art of the state, the church, and more particularly, the aristocracy. Next slide, Howard. It reflected old world values of classical education, which included the study of ancient Greek and Roman culture, as well as the writings of leading intellectuals throughout the years. Often, to fully appreciate such art, one needed to have a classical education and schooling on the proper good taste. These particular photos are of paintings that were in the 1872 Academy Salon exhibit. And you can see these classical subject matter, and you can also see this dedication toward realism. Influenced by other artists, the Impressionists moved away from the academic traditional art. But the typical heroic, narrative associated with the Impressionists of struggling artists who were panned by critics, unable to show their work at accepted institutions, and failed to sell their work during their lifetime is really not accurate. Indeed, Monet, Degas, and Renoir refused to submit their paintings to this very exhibit that we're showing here. Howard, next slide. Theirs was a choice to move away from the old institutions of art and band together to effectively control their own careers and aesthetics. They were almost immediately popular with the newly wealthy or the nouveau rich. In the 1880s, a strong market for Impressionist art developed among American, German, and English industrialists and others who enjoyed new economic success. Next slide, Howard. One could argue that Impressionism became one of the first modern art movements and appealed to modern or New World tastes. So why was Impressionist art accepted in their day and still beloved today? Next slide, Howard. It is art accessible to most everyone. The Impressionist subject matter was the everyday. They captured a daily scene or ordinary people. Next slide, Howard. They brought stillness to that instant so that we as viewers may reflect on what we see, what we take in, and what we are emotionally experiencing in that moment of time. We are seen in the moment. Howard?
Well, Ray, what a great introduction that was. That was as good as any I've ever heard. So good work, my friend. So what we are looking at here is a painting, an oil painting by Claude Monet, the big gun of the Impressionist movement. In fact, such a big gun that he was the reason they were called the Impressionists. Let's just take a second and look at a painting that's not ours. Well, look at that, Ray. What's the title of this?
Impression Sunrise.
So he was asked, what should you call it? And he said, I don't know, call it Impression Sunrise. And it was painted in 1872, and it was in the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874. So what he did, let's go back here. Let's look at our painting. Let's take a minute and just feel it. Let's take a minute and look at it. Ray, what are you seeing?
It's, it pops out, Howard. It's, you see the flowers because of those bright colors and light. And then, of course, you see this woman in the blue dress in the background. Those are the things that I immediately see.
Yep. And so that's what you're seeing, right? And they're flowers, even though they're not photorealistic. You've been able to translate in your head what you're looking at are flowers. And what did Monet do? Monet took his paints and went outside and painted. Now, he didn't paint always outside. A lot of Impressionists that were outside would take their painting back to the studio and finish them up. And he painted what he felt. He and Claude and Renoir would spend time outside looking at the light. They'd look at different types of light. They'd look at the weather. What they were interested in was capturing what the atmosphere was like in order to express to you that you could feel what the day was like. That was completely different from what the salon painters were doing. The salon painters, as you said, were painting these grand paintings of history or mythology or religious paintings. This is none of them. This is a flower garden. In fact, it's his flower garden, and it's his wife, and it's their place. It's their flower garden. And Camille is in the background with her blue dress on, which is the style of the day. You would take a walk during the day to town in your blue dress with your parasol to protect yourself from the hot summer day. Ray, why do you know it's summer there? How can you tell that it's summer?
Well, there's something about the sunlight. There's like a warmth, a feeling of warmth that you get from the light.
So you're seeing the light without really seeing the light. It's like, how do you see the light? But that's what he did. He was able to paint the light. And you see up here, you see these butterflies? These little dots? These butterflies, the butterflies are a sense of summer, right? We get this whole sense of summer where, like, remember summer vacation, how you felt free and easy and nothing was bothering you? Isn't that the kind of sense that you get of that day? And so this is how he paints it. He takes these orange and red gladioli and he puts little dabs of paint, just quick dabs of paint to give you the impression of a flower. And then he puts these dabs of blue paint down here for these blue flowers, which we're not sure what they are, and then the geraniums. And then it was very stylish to have this rounded garden. So the name of the painting, the rounded flower bed, it's a very common scene. Now, Monet didn't just automatically appear out of nowhere, Ray. I mean, he had inspiration. There were artists like Gustave Courbet and Eugene Boudin who were painting outside and painting scenes that were not monumental. They painted, Boudin painted boats on a harbor, and Courbet painted a cave with river. So that's what they did. And you know what he did? You know what Monet did? Ray, look at the shadows here. What color are the shadows? What color do you see?
I see, they're like purple, blue, gray type shadows.
Right. Shadows have colors. Oh my God, who would have thought of that? But Monet did. He spent time looking. He spent time seeing. He spent time thinking about it, and he started to put color into shadows. So that's really a radical change. And he used, separate brushstrokes out of a paint tube. He had paint in tubes, a technological advance that allowed him easy access to the outside because it was easy for him to take his already prepared paints. And he would use paint straight out of the tube and dot those paints next to each other. So this is a wonderful, easy scene that's really happy. It's small enough to hang in somebody's living room. But at the time, he was struggling for some money. They had used up all their money, and right at that moment, things were not selling that fast. And Camille got very sick that summer. But he was painting this to sell. He was an entrepreneur. This group of Impressionists that weren't called the Impressionists at the first exhibition, they were a group of independent cooperative marketing. Sounds modern, doesn't it, Ray? They were there to make money, to sell to, as you said, the newly rich middle-class people. So that's our friend Claude Monet. Are there any questions, Christine?
Not at this time, Howard.
Thank you, Christine. So there you have Impression, Sunrise, what began it all. There's Claude in his garden. He would raise flowers that would bloom at various times of the year so he could paint them. He would paint series of paintings so he could capture things in different light. Ray.
Thanks, Howard. This is obviously Edgar Degas, and it's The Violinist and a Young Woman from 1871. Degas was born to a very affluent family, and he briefly studied law. He then turned to art, and his early training was strictly traditional, Howard. He, took classes at the state-sanctioned art academy in Paris, and he studied in the traditional way Italian paintings in Italy. But then, after a while, he developed his own style, a style that associated him with the Impressionist. But Howard, take a look at this. It's different than Monet. Let's just take a look and see what we notice about the differences between the Monet that you just showed and Degas. So, Howard, you just talked about the fact that Monet built his images with paint, right? With dabs of paint. But Degas does it with lines. You can see, for instance, in the back of the woman, in the jacket of the man, in the clothing, and in different aspects of the painting, you can see that he uses lines to build up his forms and figures. He was actually an excellent draftsman, Howard. He would, I understand, carry around a sketchbook and draw people he would see or encounter to be used in his paintings and finished drawings. Howard, you spent some time about Monet, and you explored the influence of sunlight, and the use of sunlight and using bright colors to explore the outdoors and the sunlight of outdoors. But Degas painted indoors. He typically painted indoor scenes, and he rarely did paint landscapes or even outdoors. And he tended toward these darker colors. You see these rich kind of brown tones, earth tones. He tended toward those, and he explored interior light rather than outdoor light, or maybe exploring artificial light. In fact, unlike Monet, that you were just talking about, and those other artists, Renoir, Degas generally created his work in the studio. He based in large part with the spontaneous drawings or sketches that he had done in his sketchbook. So Howard, how is Degas an impressionist? Well, there's two reasons, my friend. One is these fluid brushstrokes, this fluid painting style that we see, and the second is that he painted everyday subject matter. Let's start with the painting style, Howard. You can see that these faces are somewhat defined, but you can still see the brushstroke and the skin tones, and then the brushstroke really dissolves and becomes prominent in the background, above their heads, that wall above there, and it even looks as though things are dissolving. Howard, it's almost as though this is unfinished. Howard, you want to play Sherlock Holmes for a minute?
Well, Ray, I do.
All right. So did Degas intend this to be a finished painting, or is it an unfinished painting? So what would suggest, Dr. Howard Watson, that this is unfinished is that this was found in his studio at his death. Okay, so he hadn't sold it, which would suggest that it was unfinished. But Howard, could you switch it to the next painting? This is another DIA painting, Woman with a Bandage. And Howard, the background's undefined too. And while it looks a little bit more finished, certainly, look how dissolved the clothing is here. Howard, let's go to the next slide. That's that famous Dancers in a Green Room, right? This wonderful ballet scene, a real treasure of the DIA. But look how unfinished the background is, Howard. Wouldn't that suggest that maybe Degas was exploring this idea? So could you go back one to the Woman with the Bandage? Oops. Do you notice in the corner his signature? Do you see it, Howard?
Cursor, Ray, can you see this?
I'm not seeing your cursor on my screen, but I'm trusting that you've got it going.
I got it going. I'm circling.
Okay, the bottom left-hand side.
Yeah.
Yeah. He signed that. Now, can you go back to the violinist?
So can I go back to the violinist? Yeah, of course I can.
Thank you. Do you see that there is a red signature? It looks like a signature. That's actually a stamp. So upon his death, when they went to sell it, his estate sold it, they stamped his. So that would suggest, Howard, that the Woman in the Bandage was sold during his lifetime with a signature. The ballet, the Green Room with the ballerinas was sold, during his lifetime with a signature on it, and this one didn't. But isn't it interesting as far as, we're talking about his painting style, to, I guess, my modern sensibilities, doesn't this look finished? I mean, doesn't this look like a complete painting in a sense?
No.
Because he is, focusing on their faces and that expression,
So
which leads. Go ahead, Howard.
Question there, Ray?
It was rhetorical, Howard, but if you'd like to.
Oh, I see. I actually didn't want me to talk. Is that right?
Oh, Howard, if it was that easy, Howard, if it was that easy.
Okay. Got it.
So let's go back to the Dancers in the Green Room, which is 2 slides down. There you go. So this is, again, these are the subject. We're talking about the subject matter now. All of these are daily, everyday sort of scenes. Degas tended toward scenes of, leisure activities, really, of Parisians, like the music lesson in the first painting, and of course the ballet. He's famous for the ballet. We talked about the lack of definition of surroundings, but notice the exploration of the interior light that you have here. Again, we have darker colors. And Howard, in the background, do you see that, everybody is not posing. They're going about their activities. In fact, do you see the ballerinas in the very back by the windows, what looks like a window? They're sticking out their legs, they're warming up their, does that remind you of you before we start these visual tours, Howard? In the back, kicking up your leg to stretch out beforehand.
You got to stretch, Ray, right? Otherwise, you don't want to sprain your brain like you've done occasionally, right?
Thank you. Well, that's on more than one occasion. So Howard, can you go back to our original, the violinist, and yes, okay.
Ray, you are being pretty bossy right now, you know, back and forth, back and forth.
I'm sorry, Howard. And it's just beginning, Howard, I hate to tell you. In any event, notice here, the ballerinas weren't posed, and clearly these two figures are not posed. It looks as though they're reacting to something, doesn't it, Howard?
Yeah, it's as if you walked in the room and they're going, oh my God, Ray's here. What are we going to do now? You know, it does.
But it does look like somebody interrupted them, doesn't it?
Right, doesn't it? It looks like, oh, somebody walked in, they were working on something, and they walked in and they're both looking at whatever or whoever just interrupted their lesson. I assume it was a lesson.
Yeah, and those are great questions, Howard, because there's some ambiguity about it.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't a lesson. You know, maybe he was playing and she was reading something.
Exactly. It's unclear. And, you know, Degas was known for depicting, you know, motion like we saw of the ballerinas, or these psychological insights. Mm-hmm. But is she giving a lesson, or is she maybe reading something? It's unclear, but she is on the edge of her seat. And, you know, notice, and she's clearly been interrupted. Someone has come into the room that interrupted. And she has kind of a surprised face with little apprehension, but he doesn't. He is much more relaxed, and he's sort of immersed in turning that violin. You know, and she's got the book is open, but it's kind of open to the side, like you would do when someone comes in a room and, you know, sort of maybe startles you a bit. So it's really interesting in that way. Howard, I hate to do this, Howard. Can you go after the slide after the ballerina? One more. There you go. Jockeys on a horseback before distant hills. We had to include this, Howard, because this is the favorite DIA painting of Degas of our curator, Jill Shaw. She's the DIA's Associate Curator of European Art from 1850 to 1950, and she thinks this is just a splendid example. Captivating a subject, one of the few outdoor subject matters Degas painted, which is that relationship between horse and rider, particularly thoroughbred racing. She pointed out in our training, Howard, maybe you remember this, that, you know, Degas just so elegantly captures the movements, you know, this sort of unison of movement with the rider and the horse, you know, sort of those elegant movements. So I really wanted to include that because between Jill and Christine, who's joining us, that's how we learned about Impressionists. Those were our Impressionist trainers. And it is a wonderful painting. But again, in the very background, it looks unfinished. The hills and mountains, you know, just dissolve into the background.
Well, Ray, that was a big complaint about the Impressionists, wasn't it?
It was.
It didn't finish.
And it's what isn't it funny? That's how it endears us today.
Yeah.
You know, and it's interesting too. All these Degas paintings capture just a momentary, everyday scene for the viewer to sort of reflect upon. You know, allowing the viewer to see. You know, really visually and emotionally see that very instant, that very moment. Christine, any questions?
Hi, Ray. We do have a question, and it is a general question about Impressionists and the depiction of shadow. And how was shadow previously depicted? Howard talked a little bit about Monet and clouds and shadow. Do you guys want to approach that at all?
No, it used to be, if it's all right, Ray, if I take this?
Absolutely.
It used to be that they just thought shadows were dark. It used to be they only thought shadows were dark. They were gray or shades of gray or shades of black. You know, there can be shades of black. And then when Monet and Renoir were out, they noticed that light would reflect. Let's go back here and look at this. See how sun is reflecting on the water. Well, they noticed that based on that, then they started looking at other shadows, and they noticed that the shadow could pick up the color of whatever was reflecting on it. And to be a little bit technical, you know, complementary colors are colors opposite on the color wheel. Sometimes shadows are the complement of the color up there. So, you know, artists, I had an art teacher that began to teach me how to see color and shadows. Like at first I couldn't see anything. And then after a while, when you look and look and look, you'll start to see color in shadow. So you could take and just make it a darker shade of the color. Christine, do you think that answers the question?
Howard, yes, I think thank you so much for giving a little bit of information on that. There's another question, and the viewer is speculating perhaps that the woman in the violin painting, Howard, can we go back to the violin painting? She's speculating that perhaps she is addressing students who may be in the viewer's area.
That's a good speculation.
It's very possible. It's left to us. It's entirely left to us as to what exactly is happening.
And isn't that interesting how, as viewers, we can all look at paintings and come away with different ideas about what's going on in there?
Howard, that gives me an idea. Are you ready for the next painting?
I am. So Ray, so look, we've looked at Monet putting dabs of paint on things, which the critics complained about. What the heck is that kind of way of painting, putting dabs of paint on? And then we looked at Degas, who painted inside with lines and using different sorts of brush strokes, but still, he was an impressionist. Now, look at this. This is not dabs, this is not lines, this is something completely different, but it's still impressionism. So this is Auguste Renoir. It's called Woman in an Armchair. It was done in 1874. And so let's look at it closely. Let's look at it really closely. What do we have? We have, and I apologize, I don't think that my cursor is working, so work along with me on this. We have a woman sitting in a chair. Look at her arms. Her arms are rendered, painted with these blue and kind of red and kind of different colors with quick, fast brush strokes. Look at her torso. There's light coming across her torso so that that's accentuated. And now look at her left arm, that arm that's to our right. And look at how it blends into the chair. It's hard to tell where the chair ends and her arm begins. So that was Renoir's style. He said a shop girl or a waitress could be just as beautiful as an aristocratic woman, and that the common world was just as much part of art and literature and as essential to beauty as the highborn or royalty or history paintings were. That's Impressionism, Ray. That's what we're talking about. Now let's look at her head. She's got her head slightly tilted to her right, with her right shoulder slightly raised. Her arms are crossed. Her lips are tightly closed, and her eyes are off looking at something, and she has this expression on her face. Ray, I know what you're thinking. I got it. I got that same idea. Why don't you go ahead and take it from me?
Well, yes. I mean, I think we just looked at the violinist just a moment ago, and people were speculating about what was going on. I wonder what the viewers think she's looking at, that with that crossed arm look and that sort of tilted head. Christine, I'm inviting the viewers to write in what they think she's reacting to.
So Ray, let's ask the viewers to do that. Use your write-in tool to tell us what's going on here. What do you think is happening? What is she looking at? What is she thinking? What's going on? Come on, everybody, give us, you know, help us out with this. Everybody's doing this. We've been doing this for a while. We want you to participate with us today. Help us out and do this. And listen, while we're waiting for some responses, which Christine will read, I got a cool fact, Ray.
Okay.
So Auguste Renoir's grandson, Claude Renoir, was a movie director. He directed Jane Fonda in Barbarella in 1968, and he also directed the James Bond movie, The Spy Who Loved Me, in 1977. Isn't that cool?
Howard, did you know who sang the theme song for that James Bond movie, The Spy Who Loved Me?
Oh my God, don't tell me you know that.
Of course I know that.
Oh.
It's Carly Simon. That movie came out when I was, I think, a freshman or a sophomore in college, and man, I had a crush on Carly Simon.
Oh my God, Ray, listen, I got to tell you something funny. Did I ever tell you the time that I embarrassed myself in front of Carole King?
It wouldn't surprise me, Howard, but
I told her who she was, Ray. I told her who she was. Can you imagine? I was so starstruck. I met her and I looked at her and I said, "You're Carole King." And
she said yes.
Hey, Howard and Ray, on that note,
yeah,
you have some participation and people are waiting.
Fabulous. Let's hear it, Christine. What's going on here?
Okay, a few different things. Do you want them one at a time or all together?
Let's go one
however you want. However you want.
You want to do it?
Okay. One, perhaps she's pondering something very serious, or maybe a relationship, or she just turned down a suitor.
I can see that.
Okay.
Okay, and another participant said she looks like she has attitude and that she's about ready to roll her eyes.
Okay.
That person has a daughter just like I do.
Well, the speculation there was perhaps it had something to do with a boy also.
Yes.
Okay.
Another one is that maybe she's bored, impatient, annoyed. She wants to be anywhere else but there.
All right, I could see that. Yep.
Yeah.
And another is that she is giving perhaps again a boy, a suitor, a male consort of the cold shoulder. Or that she's mad.
Oh,
and she wants whoever it is she's looking at just to leave.
Oh, I can see that. I can see that.
And the last one I have here is that perhaps she's listening, but she doesn't believe the ridiculous excuse she's getting.
That's great. I love it. Okay, so see, this is a great way to look at art. And you know, you could do that at the museum. In fact, come down to the DIA, make a reservation, and come and look at her yourself and make up your own mind about what's going on. So thank you, viewers. You were great. That was really, wasn't that fun, Ray? That was a great idea.
That was fun. And Howard, I should mention, you and I happened to go down to the museum on Sunday to take a look at what was up. And these paintings in particular are so much better in person. That Monet that we just showed is just striking in person. So I would encourage everyone to go.
Excellent. All right. So there he is. There's the man, Pierre-Auguste Renoir. And it's your turn now, Ray.
Thank you, Howard. This is done by Alfred Sicily. Sicily showed his work early on with the other Impressionists. He was a part of that first exhibition that Howard was talking about with Monet and Renoir. He was actually born in Paris to affluent British, born in Paris, yes, to affluent British parents. At 18 years old, he was sent to England to London, particularly to study business. He was to have a career in business, but after 4 years, he gave it up. And in 1861, he returned back to Paris to study art, and there he met Monet and Renoir. At Monet's invitation, Sicily started painting outdoors with Monet, and that's an activity that they would do together throughout Sicily's career. Monet introduced him to the idea of capturing the transient effect of sunlight. Unlike Monet and Renoir, however, they were very popular during their lifetimes and sold a lot of their work, Sicily struggled to sell his paintings. He lacked the success, likely caused because he was sensitive. He had a sensitive nature, and he did not have the fortitude of the other Impressionists. He became paralyzed by negative criticism. So this particular church is at Moret, which is at the edge of the Fontainebleau forest south of Paris. Sicily lived there nearly 20 years toward the end of his life in a kind of self-imposed seclusion and depression because of his lack of success. During 1893 and 1894, Sicily decided to do a series of paintings of this church at different times of day and weather. This one was done toward the end of that series of paintings in 1894. You know, it's interesting because 2 years before Sicily began doing his church series, Monet began doing a series of the Rouen Cathedral portal located in Normandy. And I think we have, Howard, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you, Howard. Here is one of those series done during the same year is the Sicily painting. Monet just also was doing this portal of the church or the cathedral, different times of years, different times of day, different types of weather. He did about 30 of them. And, you know, he was less interested, Howard, in showing the building's elements and structure, and more interesting in exploring, as you talked about, light, you know, the effects of the visual sensation of light. I mean, you can see this, Howard, on how, you know, you can see the elements kind of, but they're really secondary to how the light shows the forms. And it's no coincidence that Sicily did his series of paintings. He started them right after Monet did. Howard, could you go to the next slide, please? And here's Sicily here. You know, Sicily, as I said, knew Monet, and they had a lifelong relationship. And he became aware of the fact that Monet was doing this series, and they were immediately popular. The paintings were a sensation before he finished the series. So he copied Monet, in effect, to do his own series, and he hoped it would raise his profile and help him finally reclaim or get some acclaim and success. Howard, can you go back to the Sicily painting? Thank you. So Howard, take a look. What do you notice about this?
The building ray dominates the frame. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, it's like it just filled it all up. I mean, it's just like he was most interested in making the building is clearly the star. There's a little street. There's some people in the background. There's the brushy impressionist style of painting the sky.
Right, there is. You're absolutely right, Howard. You see that the sky of, you know, with this white, and then you have, as you were describing, that blue-gray kind of brush strokes, which is, you know, very much an Impressionist style. There's no mistakenly an Impressionist style. And you also see that, you know, Sicily's, in contrast to the Monet that we just saw, this is a little bit more restrained and detailed. It's recording things a little bit more realistically, that Monet was interested in doing. You know, this church has volume. I mean, you can feel the volume, and you can see the details. You can make out the architecture and some of the details. Now, he does use, you know, gray earth tones and so forth that again are in the, you know, of the these shadows, like up at the tower there in the very top, like you were talking about, Howard. You know, those aren't just black or gray. There's a bluish gray to it. So he is definitely following the Impressionist style in that regard. Unfortunately, Sicily was unsuccessful in selling his church series. He died in 1899, having not sold a single one of them. Indeed, unfortunately, he died stricken in poverty. However, thanks to Monet, Sicily's work in this series became popular shortly after his death. Monet organized an exhibition of Sicily's work, and with Monet's cachet, if you will, people drew to it and became interested in Sicily's work. And Monet was successful in raising money for Sicily's widow. So Sicily provides us a different way of seeing, more restraint than Monet, but still invoking the essential elements of Impressionism, studying light and color and giving the viewer an opportunity to see in the moment. Christine, any questions?
There is a comment that it really looks like this scene could be immediately after a rain, perhaps.
Right, exactly. In fact, it's called that. And it's interesting that the viewer would say that because there is this wetness that you see on the ground, this sort of sense of wetness again, rather than realistically puddles and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And Ray, is this one on view right now?
It is not. When Howard, at least it wasn't Sunday when Howard and I were there. It's one of the few that we'll be showing today. It may be the only one that is not on view of the paintings that we're showing today.
Okay, thank you. And when you do go through them, can you just mention when paintings are, when we're just looking for comparison at a painting that is not a DIA-owned painting?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure. In fact, Howard, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, this is not one of our paintings, as it suggests in the credits there. Unfortunately, it'd be lovely to have it at the DIA, but it is not.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to fix that up.
You know what?
If somebody out there,
Howard and I have been using our piggy banks are pretty full, Christine. So maybe we'll get there soon.
Okay, or perhaps when you were searching in the archives, we'll double check everyone and see if this one is ours or not. We would like to credit the correct museum. And Howard and Ray, if it doesn't belong to us, yeah, sure, put your piggy banks together, and we'd love to have this on the walls.
Ray?
Yes, Howard.
Ray, we're back in the garden with Mary Cassatt. We've been here before, and we can never be, I love being in this garden. It's just so great. This is where Mary puts us right in the painting, doesn't she, Ray? Doesn't it feel like you are standing there just over the shoulder of the woman whose back is to you and you only see a portion of her face talking to that young girl? It's an endearing picture, Howard, no question about it. And look at her face. Yeah.
It's, to me, it so suggests a mother-daughter. It really does.
So let's talk about it as being there's so many different ways to talk about Mary Cassatt, right? And we've talked about her in a number of different ways, and there's some things we want to make sure we don't miss. But let's talk about the actual painting itself. So you're looking at a woman, you're looking at a child. All it says is in the garden. That's a current painting. But before it was called Mother and Daughter, it got changed. And in fact, it is, this is Simone, we know that. We know that from the scholars and from the history. So her name is Simone. We don't know what the mother's name is, but they are mother and daughter. And so that changes it, right? That changes the whole dynamic of what you're looking at and what you're thinking. And Mary was really famous for painting scenes of domestic tranquility, of a mother lovingly being with her daughter. And how does this become a Impressionist painting? Why is this considered an Impressionist painting? Well, for one reason, Mary exhibited with the Impressionists. So by definition, it becomes an Impressionist painting. But there's also other technical parts that make it Impressionist. She's showing us it from a high vantage point. It's as if we're standing up looking down. And she's showing us a really cropped painting. She's got this blue-green chair cropped out, the chair that the woman is sitting in, and she has an incredibly high horizon line. That's the place where the earth, the ground meets the sky. If you look up, way up in the left-hand corner, you can barely see a little bit of blue. And in fact, when you're at the museum seeing it, it's even less visible. The light of the photograph heightens it. And so she's got us really tightly packed in here. She's got the garden, which is the name of the painting, way in the background, but she has a young woman and the mother, this scene of domestic tranquility, and she doesn't use, these quick, fast, blue-green brushstrokes like Renoir, or dabs like Monet, or black lines to outline things like, who was that? Degas. Who did that. So, but she still is creating a simple, non-monumental scene. It's just a scene of a mother and a daughter. But what a better scene than that? What makes life better than just a scene of a mother and a daughter? So that's what she did. And she lived in this village in Paris. After she was a child prodigy. She was in art school at 15. She left that school, went to Paris to Beaux-Arts. She actually did exhibit with the Salon earlier on, and when they rejected one of her paintings, she became very close friends with the Impressionists, Degas, Berthe Morisset, and she was invited to exhibit with them. And when she was in this town in Normandy, she lived, this is Mary in the 1900s, and she lived, get this, Ray, the United States government created a postage stamp in 1988 of Mary Cassatt. And this is it. This is a painting of that. And you know what? You see this, Ray?
Yes.
This is another postage stamp.
Very neat.
Another painting of Mary. So look at that. That's breakfast time, right? The mom is still just asleep. The dad is coming in with his breakfast. You know who has these paintings, right? These stamps?
I think I do.
Let's tell everybody who has these, right?
Christine. Christine, these are wonderful.
I have this little collection of postage stamps. I've been filling up boxes and bags since I was 10 years old. So when Howard said, "Oh, we're going to look at Mary Cassatt's postage stamp," I said, "I have another one we can share." So this one is from 1997.
So that's so great. I mean, this is obviously not our painting, but this is just an incredible painting. And in fact, what you're looking at is some of Christine's stamps. She collects art stamps. So these are various art stamps. Here's American Gothic. You know why it was called American Gothic? Because the window in the background is a Gothic window. That's in Chicago if you're ever there. And here's Mark Rothko. We have a Mark Rothko in our building. Come down and see it. This is, who's that? Franz Klein, is that who that is, Christine?
Yes.
And we have,
Yeah.
and we have that also. So we
Yep.
have a good contemporary collection too. But I'm getting a little bit off the rails here as usual. So let's go back to Mary. So Mary paints this when she's in the village living in France. This piece was actually in a show for the suffragettes movement. It was also in the Armory show in 1913 in the United States. And Mary Cassatt was one of the reasons Impressionism is so well collected in the United States, because when they were having trouble selling it in Europe, she came from a very wealthy, well-to-do family that her father was a banker, her brother was a president of Philadelphia Railroad. She knew all the movers and shakers in New York. They set up an exhibition in New York. She told everybody to buy them. So there's gigantic collections of Impressionism there. So she really not only painted Impressionism, she was a great promoter and marketer for the group. And this was her little cottage that she lived in while she was in France, just the Chateau de Buffon, just a little, small shack that she spent time in, that the kids would come and they'd pose for her. So, Christine, are there any questions about Cassatt?
Yes, there was actually a comment on in the garden painting.
Sure.
And one of the viewers is looking at it from an emotional perspective, and said that perhaps the mother is feeling sad and the little girl Simone could be comforting her.
Ah, that's a really nice way of looking at it. That's definitely a way you could look at it for sure. Thank you for that observation.
Thank you.
So, Ray,
Yes.
we have a short time. Do you want to go and start this piece, or should we save it? Your call on that.
Well, you know what? Let's see if we can't get through this quickly, Howard,
Okay.
so we can. Well,
Howard, I'm sorry to interrupt you guys. I just had a last-minute question on Cassatt that I think is important.
Sure.
One of the viewers is under the idea that Mary Cassatt was French. So do you want to talk a little bit about her nationality?
Oh yeah, sure. She spent a lot of time in France, but she was born in America. She was born in Pennsylvania. She was born in 1844, 4 years before the Seneca Falls Convention for Women's Rights, and she died in 1926, which was 6 years after the 19th Amendment, women's right to vote, was passed. So she spanned that lifetime. She was fully an American, but she went to France to learn more painting techniques. She went to the Louvre. She went to Italy. She drew and painted in the museums there. She got to know the French Impressionists very well, but she was fully an American citizen.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right, Ray, let's do Metcalf.
let's do Metcalf. This is Leroy, Willard, Metcalf. We're gonna look at two paintings, both done in 1909. This is a larger one, the White Veil. It's almost 50 inches tall and it's 50 inches wide. Howard, could you go to the next one? And this one's called Unfolding Buds, which is much smaller. It's 26 inches tall and 29 inches wide. And Howard, when we looked at these at the museum on Sunday, you mentioned that this looks like Monet. There's a Monet type feeling to it, and that's not a coincidence. Now, he was born an American. He grew up in Boston, in Cambridge. He attended school at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts Academy that they had there. And he learned the traditional academy style of painting. After he graduated, however, in 1886, he traveled and studied in France. And he was the first American painter to spend time in Giverny, which is where Monet lived at the time. And he actually met Monet and painted with him. In fact, Metcalf was one of the few Americans that Monet liked and could really stand. They shared a very strong relationship, and they had an interest in, is it ornithology, Howard? Is that the study of birds?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and in fact, Metcalf taught Monet's children that study. And Metcalf started to incorporate the Impressionist style. He even painted Monet's garden. But he abandoned Impressionism for a time when he returned to the United States. And he started resuming again with the American Academy of Fine Arts, which showed traditional academic art. In 1879, however, he returned to his Impressionist style. And in fact, he and 9 other American painters, including Child Hassam, who you'll be talking about next week, seceded from the Academy because of their hostility, their being the Academy's hostility to Impressionism. And they founded the American Impressionist movement, at that time known as the 10 American Artists. Beginning in 1904, Metcalf hit his stride, and he started painting works that are most valued. Like this particular one. Howard, take a look. You know, what time of year is it? You have the title Unfolding Buds, but what time of year is this?
It's early summer, late spring. I think it's springtime, right?
Yeah, right. You got the buds on the trees, right? You have these various shades of greens emerging from the field. So you've got that sort of sense of spring, of renewal. And then you have another sense of the renewal is this, you know, you have a sheep with the lambs. You see the small little lambs there, Howard, you know, so it really is seasonal, and it, you know, it's an emotional renewal. In fact, a critic exclaimed that this masterfully captured a true spring atmosphere. And that acclaim led to the DIA almost immediately purchasing this painting right after it was first exhibited. Howard, can you go back to the white veil?
Yes, I can.
This is considered his best painting, and it's certainly his most popular. And at the time of the exhibition in which it was shown, it was highly acclaimed by critics. So, Howard, you take a look at this. You know, what do you notice about this?
Ray, this is such an incredible rendering of a winter scene. It's when you stand in front of it, you want to put on a coat.
You know, there is that sense to it, isn't it? So he uses that kind of almost these dabs, like Monet, of white to create that veil, you know, the title, the veil. And so he builds up that sort of sense of a veil, and he conveys with that white paint that snowy day. He also uses, you know, the green in the pines and the dark brown and gray of the trees to present contrast. Could you go back? Yeah, thank you, Howard. To present contrast, and he develops the landscape that way with that contrast. He also uses grays and whites to define the sky and the snow-covered hills. Finally, Howard, and this is something you'd be familiar with, his underpainting, before he applies these whites and these greens we were just talking about, he puts a blue-violet underpainting that he dots with some red. And that creates, in my understanding, it creates a sense of warmth to sort of the gray winter light. So Howard, doesn't this show how, you know, that feeling of the landscape being transformed by a blanket of snow?
Perfect.
So
Exactly.
this particular painting is of a landscape in New Hampshire. The spring one we showed, the Unfolding Buds, was in Connecticut. In fact, the winter scene was when he was in 1909. He spent the winter with the famous American playwright Louis Shipman and Shipman's wife, and he spent the winter in his farmhouse. And he would do that from time to time to escape New York City, where his studio and residence was. So this painting allows the viewer, Howard, to perceive the falling snow, you know, the snowstorm, and perhaps has sort of a sense of nostalgic comfort, you know, of a blanket. Howard, do you recall what, you know, or maybe even now, when you look out a window and the snow is coming down forcefully, and you know, you're inside and you have that sort of feeling or sense of comfort?
I do.
Christine, any questions?
There is a question.
Okay.
This paint, well, there's a comment. One comment is that this painting makes winter look warm.
That's exactly
Good
what
comment.
he's trying to do. There's a warmth and comfort to this.
Mm-hmm. And then another comment was there integration, do you think, in his work of the East and West technique? So I'm not quite sure exactly what they might mean by that, but I know Japanese wood prints were becoming available, and artists were influenced by the work of Japan because their borders had opened, and artists all over the world were starting to see the kind of work that the Japanese artists were doing. And I know that did influence some of the Impressionists. So I think this question might have been, do you think that influenced Metcalf?
Yes, it did. It influenced Monet, who we spent time with. And we know Degas, it influenced, certainly. And next session, we'll be talking about Van Gogh. And he was very influenced by the Japanese art in general. Whistler, too. Anything else, Christine?
No, that's it. Thank you.
So Ray.
So, Howard, you'll start us off with the other American right there. The other American who was part of the 10.
Let me give you a sneak preview.
Sure.
So I want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you, Ray, for being my partner and letting me come back. I appreciate that. I know I didn't have to pay you too much money to let me do that. And we want to thank you all for your participation today. We had really a great time. And this is a wonderful painting. It's actually my favorite painting. And so this is a sneak preview. We're going to start with this piece next week. We're going to finish our Impressionist in the Moment talk next week, Thursday, 1 o'clock. So for everybody there, for Ray, myself, for Christine, Amanda, Kimmy, thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Howard.
Thank you.